Hi, welcome to STEMPowered, brought to you by Wadhwani AI and supported by USAID, a series focused on contributions of women towards STEM and beyond. I'm Shreya Thakur and I work as a group product manager at Wadhwani AI. In today's episode, we are joined by the lovely Dr. Sarayu Natarajan, who is the founder of Aapti Institute, an organization focused on research towards technology policy and innovation. Let's tune in to hear what we spoke about on the ethical frameworks of AI. So, Saryu, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome on board.
Thank you. The pleasure is all mine.
So, Saryu, I think the way that we want to cover today's podcast session would be to touch upon some of the work that both the organizations have been doing in the space of women and at the intersection of AI in ethics. Right? Where do you see a woman and AI and ethics in India, and where do you see it going forward from here on?
Thank you for that. I think articulating a clear problem statement is very critical to jump into thinking about better ways to build technology, AI especially, for women. Particularly for women, there are two types of experiences that need to be paid attention to. One is experiences that are unique, which is that only women, people who identify as women, undergo. The other is experiences which are exaggerated relative to some other type of the population with respect to technology. To give you very simple examples with respect to unique experiences, menstruation is a unique experience that only women or people who identify as women undergo. Experiences which are exaggerated may relate, for example, to access to technology. So you are, in theory, as a person, a citizen, entitled to having access to a phone, but in reality, it might be mediated by the societal structure. So your experiences is similar, but different in that it's mediated by the social structure that you're a part of.
Okay.
And even in thinking about AI, paying attention to, is it a unique experience or is it an exaggerated experience, has implications in how you think about identifying the problem, remediating the problem, as well as regulating the problem. And I think this unique facet or this way of framing gendered experiences with respect to technology is an important starting point. Now, from there, you can launch into thinking about the why or the what of looking at women in technology. I think the reasons are very simple, but I've had to revisit my own feminist position quite a bit over the course of my work. I think it's fundamental. You're talking about citizens of this world who need to have access to all of the wonderful things that technology brings or the world brings, and that's it. But there's also, I think, increasingly the need to make an economic argument for women's participation with respect to technology. That is the market, the economic argument, which is that when women wield economic power, wonderful things happen, and therefore it's critical to think about female participation in technology decision-making as well as the implications of technology on groups of women.
Do you foresee that, women have been given that seat at the table in defining some of these problem statements, identifying them, playing a role in, solving for it? Or do you still feel that that gap exists for the Indian domain? Because I think world over, things are slightly different. It's also a spillover of what is happening in the developed nations, and we are trying to react to that. But probably because the Indian society as a whole is so different, and we're trying to match up, right? While we have had our own course of reaching over there, we're kind of trying to match up to the pace that the developed ecosystem is offering us. Where do you foresee that tussle, and how do you foresee that panning out for India?
Now, why is India exceptional? I think in addition to the divides of class and gender, India has a couple of other extra layers. One is language. India has significant language diversity. And in imagining AI development, particularly of certain types of AI, this language diversity becomes a critical factor to think about. And some languages are more dominant in that data from particular languages is more easily, readily available in machine-readable format, whereas it may not be the same of languages that are spoken by smaller and smaller subgroups. So that's one. And that is, to my mind, a sort of functional variation that happens across the country, one that you have to be cognizant of and solve for. But it's not unique to India, but it is very significantly manifested in India, and that it's a big country, it's a billion people, etc. I think the second dimension, which is less hidden and there's starting to be a little emerging evidence of it, is caste. I think with technology, it's a bit complicated, the relationship caste bears. There's an emerging body of research that talks about how it continues to play out. But having said that, that's another fairly unique factor to South Asia, particularly India.
Yeah.
So I think keeping these two in mind, these are the two factors that make the Indian experience unique. And when you layer on these advantages, disadvantages, or the hierarchies that appear in language or caste onto gender, there's a magnifying effect that happens. So there's what social scientists tend to call intersectionality. So when you have that kind of complicated mix of factors or variables that drive experiences with respect to digital systems or digital technologies, then there's a case to think about India as a unique experience, and women's experiences in that sense are shaped by the society. So patriarchy, caste, the language magnify or diminish their experiences with respect to AI. So that's one part. But exceptionalism is a bit tricky. This does not make all of the problems of AI exceptional or unique to India. There might be harms, and the distribution of harms might fall in different patterns in India. But having said that, exclusion, whether you're excluded somewhere else in the world or you're excluded in India, the harm is a similar, or rather the right to remediation of that harm comes from a similar place, which is within the legal system, the country's international obligations, etc. So exceptionalism is useful in understanding and building better AI technologies, in even mapping harms empirically, but we should be careful of not extending that to thinking about mechanisms of redress.
With that, maybe I would like to jump into anything that you would like to also let our audience know about how some of the steps by Government of India have been very pertinent in the direction, and if you feel that it is going to take more time, or it is going to be the need of the hour, like we're discussing some of these use cases, anything that comes from your experience or your interactions with some of these stakeholders that you feel will play a major role in the next 6 to 8 months of how the AI ethics game is shaping up.
I think on the first, India has made a whole lot of progress, but the three big priorities with respect to India as an innovator of AI are data, and we talked about that a little bit, but gender representation in data is a key area of concern. Several reports of the government have referred to it, but I think that there's genuine labor that needs to be done in terms of building or imagining or thinking about data as truly representative of the female experience. The second is compute. Second need for India as an AI innovator is compute, which of course has far less of a gender lens, but worth noting as a key enabler to the innovation ecosystem as a whole. Downstream effects of access to compute might have a gender component to it, but having said that, I think it's largely one of those esoteric-ish policy problems that need to be solved at the governmental level. I think there's a third, which is capacity. So just as much as you need data and compute, which are the raw material for AI development, you need people. India has done over the last few decades exceptionally well in creating, enabling, supporting engineering talent. There are a large number of engineering colleges. I mean, STEM, more broadly speaking, the capacity to work with AI is getting increasingly more distributed. But having said that, some of the older barriers that women experience in accessing educational systems remain. And I think a key part of this process, or the there's a need to be very attentive to what it means to bring women more equally into the table in terms of developing AI. Now, just having women in the room does not solve the problems that technologies have. And so thinking about capacity, thinking about the capacity of women to build AI is useful. So that's the India priority as an innovator of AI, making sure that women are a part of building AI, are a part of the new innovation economy, benefit from it as startup entrepreneurs or as employees in organizations with the technical skills is one part. The second is India's role in terms of thinking about the downstream effects of AI on women. And there are a few categories of harm, some of which are unique in that women are excluded because they don't have access to the mediators of the system. So India's role there is useful. The other part of it is thinking about specific harms such as invasion of privacy and safety harms that are especially exaggerated for women. So again, India's role in thinking about that has been what has been the focus of the debate in a certain way. Now, having said that, Indian laws or the Indian legal framework is generally well equipped to tackle a wide variety of challenges.
Okay.
So particularly with financial services, for example, we have the RBI, there are regulations in place. So the question now becomes, is there an additional layer or a digital plus gender update that is necessary? And I think there are specific nuances to each sector and must be tackled in such a manner.
Okay. No, that's great. So yeah, I think that calls out a need for having some regulation, which also gives scope for innovation, have more women on board. But that is something that I would like to move towards, the concept of building digital public infrastructure or digital public goods, wherein the ecosystem is banding up. Organization like yours and ours, we are trying to group up with various other ecosystem players. What are some of the key things that you would like to call out as, when you're building that? What are probably 2 to 3 things that you feel, at this juncture, everybody should be mindful of? And do you also foresee a way wherein DPGs are going to define that extensively in the longer run, wherein, it will continue to offer that test bed also for any other innovators to build on? Or any other point that, you feel that ecosystem should be mindful of?
While the potential is indeed there, and it's increasingly been demonstrated in different contexts, in different sectors, there are a few things to be attentive to, even with respect to digital public goods. One is what power and control we actually have in building technical systems, which is that very many values, such as privacy, pertaining to, data governance, can actually be encoded.
Right.
And how much or to what extent can the values that we hold towards women or gender minorities, how much can they be encoded in the technology itself is one thing to think about in the context of digital public goods. We're building out these public goods. Can they also embed within them some kind of value system? That's one part of the debate to me. The second part of it is we're saying that there's capability to innovate, but smaller organizations may not have the capacity necessarily to build off these networks or benefit from these protocols. And that is true for smaller women entrepreneurs who may not necessarily be able to use technical systems with the same capacities. So DPG is not just the good. I think DPG thinking, which is why I call it DPG thinking, should extend to thinking about the capacities of ecosystem players to use this. And in addition to the actual technical capacity, like how do I use a stack of goods that enable me to make AI in a meaningful way to build a solution for myself, my organization, and my community, but also how do you finance it, how do you keep it sustainable, etc. need to be questions that are embedded right within. Because as digital public goods get increasingly used by those who may not have as much resources and access to capital, the ability to build alternative systems also gets limited. So thinking about sustainability upfront is useful. It's not so much a gendered question as a foundational one, but if you're thinking about who's at the margins and who needs this to be sustainable, then the gender question becomes very significant.
I think, Saryu, this has been an interesting conversation. This gives food for thought for all of us, yourself and myself included, as to how this is going to go as a way forward. I think in the concluding section, just like to touch upon how women in STEM can see themselves probably integrating themselves as part of this journey, and what would probably be like a 2.0, 3.0 advice to them as somebody who is an extensive and experienced woman in this domain. And I think that would be an interesting key takeaway for all of us.
I have very little advice to offer. I think that my exhortation would be to urge any participant of the digital economy, but particularly women in STEM disciplines, to think about the various roles in which they interact with technology. They may interact with it as workers. And, we've done work in thinking about a variety of gender roles with respect to technology. So you might interact with it as a worker, so you're a labeler, or you're building the technology. You might interact with it as a consumer. Mm-hmm. You might interact with it as a citizen of a country accessing, let's say, social welfare under a program that's automated. You might be interacting with it as a consumer of technology, which is that you're beneficiary or not. Yeah. And I think my exhortation would be to think about what different capacities you have as an individual in each of these domains, and use it to the fullest. I think my deep sense, and perhaps one of the reasons I even started this organization, Aapti, is because I believe that our lives are deeply intertwined with technology. And it was impossible for me when I was doing my fieldwork in 2014 to look away from the role technology was playing. And I think for us to be conscious that for women in tech to be conscious that the feminist path or the gender sensitive path is one that is deeply entwined to the role that they are playing with technology is critical. So if you are building technology, make ethics a part of the conversation. Think about ways in which bigger frameworks pertaining to responsibility can be downstream. And we're doing some of the work. I know Wadhwani is also doing some of the work. So some of these resources are fairly easily available. So that's one part. So in your role as builders, think about that. In your role as consumers, never hesitate to push back and ask. Right. I think that we often forget how much power the question has. So both as workers and consumers, think about ways of coming together and querying, interrogating, pushing back against some of the oppressions of technology. There's a lot of benefit, but sometimes it's oppressive. And then as citizens, of course, we have to be conscious that we are in a democratic context. Particularly in India, we are all protected by a legal and constitutional regime. Yeah. And let us not forget that either in building technology or as beneficiaries or recipients of it. Aside from that, some of our work has shown that the act of coming together around technology is actually quite significant in shaping the way it is designed. And, I think you've demonstrated that with your product development cycles. So I think that there's a great sort of coming together of these kinds of thoughts. But I think that that's what I'd leave the community with.
No, that is amazing. Thank you so much, Sarayu. I think those thoughts are something that is for all of us to ponder upon, play roles in our own individual lives as consumers or as builders of technology, or even as influencers at the intersection of some of these responsibilities that may be entrusted to us. Thank you so much, Sarayu, for your time. And
pleasure's all mine.
Thank you. It was great having you on board. Thank you so much for tuning in. It was a lovely session with the lovely Sarayu Natarajan on our first episode of STEMPowered. If you liked watching in or listening to our podcast, please do. If you're watching it on YouTube, please do subscribe it and share it with people who might benefit out of it. And if you are an audio listener, please add it to your podcast list and do tune into our next episode. Till then, stay empowered.